But I tell you this just to tell you something about the progress of my thinking about war. And when the Vietnam War started, I was an opponent of the war from the start. And part of it had to do with my study of American history. And if you don't know history, and the president gets up before the microphone and tells you, well, we have to go to war because we've been attacked, as Lyndon Johnson said, we've been attacked in the Gulf of Tonkin. People didn't know, who knew where the Gulf of Tonkin was, and people who thought it was probably off the coast of San Francisco, you see. And maybe Lyndon Johnson didn't know where the Gulf of Tonkin was until somebody pointed it out to him on the map. But we've been attacked, and so you have to go to war. So, yeah, if you didn't have any history and the president tells you, well, we've been attacked, well, you're not going to question him. If you knew the history of the Mexican War, if you knew the history of wars in general, if you knew how many lies have been told by presidents to the public to get them into war, well, you might not immediately rush to accept what the president says. You might be skeptical. And if the president says, we're doing this to bring democracy to the Vietnamese people, we're doing this because we believe in self-determination, which is ironic, of course. We're going to send troops into this country so that they can determine their own destiny. But if you don't have any history, and if you don't have a history of all the promises that have been told and all the statements that have been made about fighting for democracy and liberty and so on, well, yes, you'll go along with it. But when I looked at the history of American foreign policy, when I looked at the wars that the United States had fought, and looked at the Mexican War, looked at the Spanish-American War, and looked at the war in the Philippines, well, yeah, an endless stream of lies told to the American public. And the motives, the real motives for these wars hidden from the American public. Oh, we're going to free the Cubans from Spanish control. Always going to free somebody from somebody else's control. And United Fruit was in, and now Cuba was not Spain's, but ours. Those motives were not told to the American people. No, we're going to save the Cubans from Spain. And we're going to go into the Philippines to civilize and Christianize the Filipinos. The Filipinos themselves had a different view of it, and they fought back for years. But finally, we brought them civilization, killing several 100,000 of them in the process in a long and bloody war, which gets very little attention in our history books. The Spanish-American War gets a lot of attention. Roosevelt, the Rough Riders, San Juan Hill. It's a wonderful moment. But the war in the Philippines is a bloody and ugly war, gets very little attention. A war in which President Theodore Roosevelt congratulated a general who had massacred 600 Filipinos on a southern island in the Philippines. Men, women, children, a massacre of people who had no arms, no weapons. Roosevelt congratulated the general, leading Mark Twain to denounce Theodore Roosevelt. It's always interesting to me that when they draw up a list of great presidents in the United States, Theodore Roosevelt is always somewhere there. Andrew Jackson, a racist and slave owner and killer of Indians, also always there. Woodrow Wilson is there. Well, he's the idealist. That's the name given to Woodrow Wilson. And it's still the view of Woodrow Wilson. But if you really look into the history of American foreign policy under Wilson, and you see, oh, Wilson sends the Navy down to the Mexican coast to bombard a Mexican city in 1914 and kill several hundred Mexicans because they arrested a few American sailors. saying that the sailors were drunk, which is very hard to believe, you see. And then in 1915, Wilson sends Marines to occupy Haiti. They're going to occupy Haiti for a long time. When the Haitians resist, several thousand of them are killed. 1916, Wilson sends Marines into the Dominican Republic. They're going to stay there for many years, too. By the way, the history of all of these occupations should suggest something to us when we're occupying Iraq about whether occupations bring democracy to other countries or whether they just bring death and suffering to these other countries. There's a history of occupations which is very instructive. We occupied the Philippines for 50 years. And what was the result? Was it democracy in the Philippines, or dictatorship after dictatorship, which we were happy to support? So, yes, history is important for understanding motives and to realize that, and this is a very important and crucial realization for any citizen, to realize that the interests of the people in power may not be your interests. That they have their own interests separate from yours. The interests of George Bush are not the interests of the guy he sends to Iraq. The interests of Exxon or Halliburton are not the interests of ordinary people. Because until you become skeptical of the claims of the leaders of the country, so long as you think, oh, we're bound together by something called national interest, you will be deceived again and again. I came to a number of sort of conclusions about war, and one of them is something that Dr. Gino Strada has made clear again and again, and that is war is always a war against civilians. At one time, as he pointed out, at one time the ratio of military civilians was 10-1 in World War I, but it changed in World War II, and since then the ratio has been 90% civilians. So how can you justify that? Even if you're going to get rid of a tyrant. You're going to get rid of Saddam Hussein. Great. In the course of getting rid of Saddam Hussein, you're going to kill, how many? 10,000, 20,000, 50,000? The British medical journal Lancet thought maybe up to 100,000. You're going to kill that many Iraqi people so that you can get rid of Saddam Hussein? You're going to kill the victims of Saddam Hussein. You go to war against a tyrant, who do you kill? You kill the victims of the tyrant. It's an important thing to keep in mind, because otherwise you'll be deceived. I think, well, it's important to get rid of tyrants. But that the issue of motive is very crucial there, because if you really think that the motive of the United States is to get rid of tyrants, you might believe them. But if you know the history of the United States, you might learn that, no, our motives are not usually to get rid of tyrants. We have supported tyrants all over the world, again and again. We have gotten rid of democratically elected governments and replaced them with tyrants. It can't be that we go to war to get rid of a tyrant. And when you understand that the motives of the people in power are different than yours, their interests are different than yours, that really makes things very, very different. So war, we've just reached that point in human history, and I won't even say it, when we reach that point, but we certainly have reached that point today, where the technology of modern war is such that whatever the cause, whatever the good cause, to get rid of this tyrant, to stop this aggression, to whatever the cause, and it may, there may be a noble cause somewhere involved that it's good to get rid of a tyrant, it's good to accomplish it. Whatever the motive, whatever the cause, war because of what it does to human beings, cannot be justified.